Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Using Self-Service Analytics to Boost Customer Targeting, Response, and ROI. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Fadi Bassil, Maimoona Block, and Bob Middleton, who will be running today's presentation. Over to you, Fadi.
Thank you, Fiona. So we have also Maimoona and Bob. Maimoona, do you want to get going?
Yes. So thank you for those introductions. So I think today when we're talking about, I want to cover self-service analytics and what that really means. And the mission here really is to make sure that organizations and users within that organization and employees are empowered with data-driven decisions. And really the idea behind that is making sure everyone has access to, or analysts have access to all the data, that they can easily join that data, and then that everyone within the organization can visually view the data and perform analysis and really be able to make these ad hoc data-driven decisions and be proactive in their decision-making. Of course, today we're going to talk specifically about how to use self-service analytics to boost customer response and ROI. And the way we'll do that is really by focusing on 5 key analytics you need to perform. And those are around customer acquisition, segmentation of customers, understanding customer sentiment, and then really digging into the lifetime customer value and then how they respond to offers. And it's good to think of these as a layered process. But of course, you can always start over and loop back through the process to keep digging deeper into your customers. So let's talk a little about customer acquisition. And some of the problems and maybe some of the issues you might have there is for performing the best possible analytics you can on your customers. So often a problem for customer acquisition is that you're getting data from many, many sources when you're interacting with customers. So this could be through a CRM system, a catalog transaction system, e-commerce logs, store transactions, and often there, it's semi-simple to blend data when you have 2 sources, but as we progress, there's much, much more data in the world, which is great, and it's much of a benefit to organizations, but it's also a problem as far as the time it takes and the volumes of data you have to blend. In addition, when you're getting the data in around customer interactions, the data might have different key values, customer names, people might have used nicknames or initials in different places, and so sometimes there's problems around matching that data and making sure you're matching your customers across all these different data points. You also may want to add data such as the distance to stores, so you're really getting the full picture around these customers and how that spatial data might help you understand them better and where they're coming from. So with that, I'd love to dive into how you can help accomplish this, these analytics.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona. So here we are looking at the Alteryx, the desktop designer. Essentially, Alteryx is an end-to-end self-service analytics platform that includes data cleaning and blending, geospatial analytics, and predictive analytics, and can output to third-party visualization platforms such as Tableau, and we'll see this in our examples. Just a quick run through the interface. Here in the middle section, we have the canvas where we build our workflows, but in this case, they are already pre-built. Above that, we have the 220 plus tools that are available through Alteryx. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have the configuration pane, and in the bottom section, we can see the results. Now, specifically for customer acquisition, we are looking at assessing and optimizing our channel-based marketing and product assortment based on channel-specific internal data that we have. Now, as you'd expect in most organizations, this data would be sitting in multiple sources, some in databases, some coming through as Excel sheets or CSV file. So in this example, we are reading some transaction details, here the top 3 data sources. We are reading product details, customer information, and store location details. Now all of these in this example are being read as flat files, but it's as easy to connect to databases and read in tables of data into Alteryx. So back to our transactions, we have catalog transactions, e-commerce transactions, and store transactions. We start by labeling these with the correct channel title, so catalog, e-commerce, and store. Then we combine all three data sources into a single table using the union tool. We then do our first expansion of the data, and we bring in our product details and join them to our transaction details based on the product SKU. With this product detail added, we then make sure that we remove any duplicates in our data. And then for our analysis, we're specifically interested in looking at our three types of products: furniture, technology, and office supplies. So we're using this filter tool to filter on these three specific data sets. Let's say in the future we're interested in a different set of product categories for our analysis. It's as simple as coming back to this filter tool, replacing the categories in here, and rerunning the workflow, and we'd have our new analysis. Our transaction data has multiple transactions for every customer, channel, product, and product subcategory, and we're looking really to assess the channel performance and using this customer data. So we're aggregating our transaction details at the customer level, channel, product category, and subcategory, and counting our transaction IDs effectively to see what's the performance of every channel and product in our data set. At this point in time, we're ready to bring in our customer information. So we join our transaction details with our customer information based on the customer ID. Now, obviously, in here we have a clean data set and we're using clean, easy fields to join on. But in many organizations, our customer information would have names and addresses, let's say, but in reality, it wouldn't have such a clean field to join on. For these cases, Alteryx has the fuzzy matching tool, which allows us to join on non-identical keys, even, let's say, misspellings and variations on names like Maimoona mentioned. So, for example, let's say we have a name that's Jack, J-A-K, and Jack, J-A-C-K. The fuzzy matching tool can easily handle that. Now that we have our customer information in with the transaction and product details, we want to bring in our store information to essentially do some kind of customer to store analysis. Specifically in here, for example, we want to look at the distance between the customer and the store to check if the customers who are, let's say, within half a mile of the store tend to use the store as the predominant channel. So we join our prepared data set with our store information, the store number and store ID. And then we use this geospatial tool to calculate the distance between the customer and the store. In here, we're doing some data cleaning. We make sure that we remove any duplicates, fix the data of any issues. And then at this point in time, we're ready with a clean data set to build our predictive models by simply placing here the predictive model that we're interested in. And here we're using a forest model. It's as simple as just specifying the parameters of the model. There's no coding required. So we select the channel as our target variable, or the variable that we want to optimize, let's say. And then we select our predictor variables, or the parameters that we want to use to assess the channel performance. We then take the output model and, using the scoring tool, apply it to all of the customer information that we've expanded in this data set. We do a bit of final touches on the output and then send the output to Tableau. Now, all of this can actually be done outside Alteryx, but in most cases it will have to be actually done in multiple tools. So, for example, let's say the data cleaning and blending has to be done in Excel or SQL. Then the data has to be exported to some geospatial platform where the geospatial analysis is done. Then, again, the data has to be exported and loaded into some predictive analytics platform. While in here, as you see, it's as easy as building a full workflow with all three analysis steps, and the result is out into Tableau. So in here, I'll just quickly open the Tableau workbook, and we'll see the result of our analysis. Here we go. Bob?
Thank you. That was great. Now, At Tableau, we usually advise restricting the number of colors used on a dashboard, but here you can see that the use of distinct color groups to split the dashboard into 4 quadrants actually makes the data very clear, and that green bar chart cries out for further analysis to see if there really is a correlation between distance to store and customer satisfaction. The map is used to good effect to show which demographic groups are dominant in each area. Something else I'd like to dive deeper into later. And then the lower charts take me down into product level detail. And from here I would personally add a little bit of filtering so I could drill down to even more detail. With Tableau you can add checkbox filters very easily, or I could turn one or more elements of the dashboard itself into filters. So maybe I could click on a product category and see the whole dashboard change to focus on the things that I've selected. So the combination of the tools gives me that power and ability. Okay, back to you.
Thank you, Bob. Maimoona, are you on mute?
Apologies. Thank you so much. So I think one thing we saw there that was really cool was you have a beautiful Tableau dashboard built, and as Bob says, it really cries for further digging visually when you see the different colors and how it's broken out. And what's really nice here is that when everything's built in that Alteryx workflow, then when the data updates, it's pulling from that data source, so you don't have to go back and start over again, and it is built in that one workflow that Fadi was mentioning. So anyways, now that we've really seen where our customers are coming from and how we're acquiring them, you can really dive deep into, okay, what are the differences between our customers and how do we segment these customers so we can speak to them specifically to their needs and, understand a little bit more about them, because it's about building this relationship with customers, right? So really, the great thing about this is you can overlay segmentation from third-party sources. So you can include data such as Mosaic from Experian, and there's 3 or 4 sources you can include data from, third-party data from, as well as creating custom segmentation. So once you really start diving into this customer segmentation, they might become more discrete and more distinct. And so this is really about you being able to control how you put your customers in different categories and how you want to speak to them for your industry or for your company. So with that, let's dive into how you can create customer segmentation within the workflow.
Thank you, Maimoona. So as you were mentioning, Alteryx really supports using third-party data sets such as the Mosaic dataset from Experian or the Dun & Bradstreet dataset to segment our customers. But for cases where maybe these third-party data sets aren't as granular or maybe too granular for our own internal customer data sets, we can also use custom segmentation within Alteryx, which is what we're doing in this workflow. So we start by reading in our customer transaction details, but as well as our own internal customer details along with their Mosaic equivalent data sets. Because we want to use effectively this Mosaic data set to expand or enrich our own internal segmentation. But back to our customer level transaction data. Again, we have multiple transactions for every customer. So we're aggregating this data set at the customer level, and we're calculating total spend, average spend, and store visits, because we want to use some of these measures in our custom segmentation. Alteryx is not a visualization platform, but we still do have a visual data investigation tool. So in here, you see we're using this histogram tool to create these plots of the distribution of our customer transaction data based on total spend, average spend, and the store visits. As you see in here, we can glean some high-level insights into our customer data by looking at these charts. Well, back to our segmentation objective, we're using the segregated customer data set, and we're splitting it into 2 data streams and feeding it into these 2 tile tools. Now, these tile tools use variation in our data based on the target field. So let's say in here I have average span. So I'm using the data in the average span, and namely the variation in this data to put my customers in groups based on the commonalities in this variation. In the first one, we're using average span as our target field for segmentation, and then use those groups that were generated within the tiling tool with a formula tool to create some labels for subcategories. So we're saying here low, medium, or high based on the span category. And as you see in here, I'm using some coding, an if-then-else statement, but this is as much coding as we might need to be exposed to in Alteryx. And really, these are all documented under the function tool with very clear descriptions on how to use them. Now, in the second data stream, I'm tiling or segmenting my data based on store visits, and similarly applying a grouping label, low, medium, and high, based on whichever groups those customers fall into. I then bring in both data streams into a single table by joining on the customer ID, so that as a result, I would have the customer detail as well as the spend category and visit category that we've just created here as custom segments. And as a last step in the workflow, I bring in my mosaic data from Experian and join it to my internal segmentation, so that I have both my internal segmentation as well as the mosaic group segmentation. And this is useful whenever I might want to use this data set that I've just created to potentially find new customers where I don't have necessarily the customer segmentation that map, let's say, to the top customers in my internal data set. And then as a last step, I output the result into Tableau for visualization. And I open the Tableau workbook by clicking on the hyperlink. Here we go. Bob, off to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Fadi. Now we've brought in those labels from the mosaic groups, we can start to see so much about our customer database, about the demographics that they belong to. Up in the top left, you see the dots, and it gives me an almost Bostrom matrix view, which very clearly shows me where my sweet spots are. And that large blue dot at the top is crying out to be investigated further. Down below, we've got a simple map showing where our customers live, and that could help with store planning. But it could also let me filter down to that level of detail, because within Tableau, I could turn that map into a filter, so I could click on one of those zones and zoom in, and I have the whole dashboard just showing me what's within that area. And over on the right-hand side, you can see very clearly now from the mosaic group data where my customers actually are. So I can start now looking and seeing that single or new home starters with no kids and medium income is a real source of income for our store. And all this leaps out of the chart at me because it's all been put together in a very visual way. Thank you, Fadi.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, guys. So, I think what's really cool there and what Bob was mentioning is that you really want to dig deeper. And I think what we see a lot of organizations go through when they're in the middle of really becoming data-driven and trying to make data-driven decisions is that once you start really visually seeing the data and you realize how much information you can glean and what kind of insights you can see from that, then you start wanting to analyze your data more and you want to visualize more. And that begs the question, how do we process and analyze our data faster? And so I think, again, that's our mission statement, is to make sure that organizations can analyze all their data faster. And I think customer sentiment and survey data is one of those areas that you need to do it to understand your customer, to see where they're coming from, and if there's one particular thing that stands out, you could improve, but at the same time, it is a very tedious process to combine customer data. And then in addition, you want a full picture, and you're trying to overlay acquisition and segmentation data over that sentiment analysis. So we already talked about how you can accomplish the acquisition and segmentation data, but now you're going through and you're combining surveys, and processing this data can take 10 hours. And if you're trying to do this weekly or even monthly, it does get tedious, and you start to think, okay, well, when am I going to get to the point where I can actually analyze my data? I think the thing that's really great about what we're seeing here is that most customers and organizations are able to get this process down to 15 to 30 seconds. Again, so you're really trying, then you can analyze the data as opposed to spending time processing the data. And then again, really understanding your customers, so then you can respond to them in a more efficient and personalized way. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Fadi.
Thank you, Maimoona. So really for customer sentiment, as Maimoona mentioned, we're looking at assessing using survey data to have a view on our customer opinion. But in general, survey data tends to require a good chunk of preparation time before any analysis can be done. Especially like when a third-party survey data is being used, the data tends to be sent, if you look in here, as every individual responder in a row with all the data being sent in the different fields of the single row, and some sort of coded question reference in the column headers. Some of them aren't really as descriptive, like let's say value, what does that talk about? So part of the preparation is really to transform this data into something that can be easily analyzable. Also with this data set, there would be a key reference file that would have the coding of the column questions, but as well as the original questions that were asked in the survey. So see, we need to treat those. Also, typically in surveys, we'd have questions where the responder can select one or more answers. Again, this requires some data preparation to separate these answers for actually looking at what the users actually responded in their survey. So we start first by transforming our data set from having the answers in the individual rows to, for every survey, as you see in here, I have every answer in its own row. So that's the first step in making it easier to analyze. We're using here the single tool, the transpose tool. Now we still have this question line that we need to address where it has more than one answer. So here we're using this parsing tool to split our data with question line being repeated for the number of times that the user responded with a certain value. So essentially, if I can think of my time using SQL, those two steps traditionally would tend to use a good chunk of time, let's say a couple of hours, going back and forth between the SQL code and the data preparation to really make the data in a format that I can easily use. While in here, there's just two tools. So again, we're doing a bit of data cleansing in here. Then with the select tool, we're renaming the columns using names that are more useful. So let's say we have age, gender, past purchases. For name, we really mean question. For value, we really mean response. And as the last step in this processing, we're using this find and replace to replace those coded question with their equivalent original question. So at the output, I have a nice data set with the surveys, the answers in their individual rows, and the original questions coming from the survey that I can easily visualize and use in my analysis. Now really the value in this workflow is that it's repeatable. So let's say a new user takes 30 minutes to build this workflow to process the first survey. But then when the next survey comes in, it's as simple as changing the inputs, executing the workflow, and we have the result out. And that's really the 15 to 30 seconds that Maimoona, you mentioned in your slides. Now we can look at the visualization from Tableau. And here it is.
Thank you. Now, I started off by saying that usually we recommend keeping the number of colors on a dashboard down. And here you can see why. The Net Promoter detail here leaps out of the dashboard at you. You can see very clearly that people are very happy with our products and our support. But availability and shipping is that massive red area further down. again, my next step would be to add some filtering and interactivity. Imagine being able to click on one of those age distributions and look at how the Net Promoter Score changes for that range, or the number of visits. And it's that easy once you've got this interactivity built in. And you can use individual areas of the dashboard as filters, or you could actually add the filters on at the side where it's a bit more obvious for people who aren't used to this kind of tool to be able to do that for themselves. And you can see from the dashboard here and the Tableau interface around it, it's very easy to go and change things and add your own style and then start drilling down into whatever you want to see from this data. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
And it's interesting when Bob's talking about the colors, we've seen some really beautiful dashboards that people have done, and even some people coming up with, you're matching it to maybe your own organization's colors, or having sort of a center of excellence as far as the colors that you're using in dashboards. Again, it's really about building out something that people can see and understand their data. And something else Fadi mentioned was it's really great because once you have that workflow built out, not only is it easy to bring in new data, but then you can also hand off this workflow. So whether you're on vacation or it's not a project you're working on anymore, anyone can go into this workflow and see step by step exactly how the analytic process was accomplished. It's easy to tweak or change, and then as well as apply predictive analytics, which is really interesting because what every organization wants to do is be proactive, right? Once you've looked at your customers, you've understood them, now you're trying to say, okay, well, how do we find more people like this? And how do we find the right customers? And how do we figure out who we can talk to in the same manner as those segments we've already identified? And this really is all about finding the lifetime value and then trying to match those. And something that's interesting is that because this workflow is reusable, anyone can go in and apply that predictive analytics and pass it off, as well as if you have the wherewithal, or if this is something your organization already has in place, you can create R coding within that predictive and make that a macro. However, it's not necessary. And so you can immediately see the results and then see which customers to focus on without doing any coding, but by applying these predictive tools. And so Fadi can dive a little more into how to assess lifetime value.
Thank you, Maimoona. So really in here you see this workflow is built as a standalone example, but in reality it's building on the different steps that we've done in especially in the customer acquisition and customer segmentation. So if I look quickly at the input in here, really I'm using my customer segmentation with the custom segmentations that we've created for category and visits, as well as the mosaic data. And here in this example, we want to look at our existing customers with the custom segments, and the mosaic data to calculate their lifetime value. But then not stop there. We want to use this lifetime value and our internal customer details to really look at new customers that might actually be of high lifetime value if they are of similar characteristics. So again, we're reading in our customer details. These are the existing customers, and then we're reading new customer lists with their mosaic data attached. And here we're labeling those two data sources as current or new, and then we're combining them into a single data set for analysis. At this point in time, if I quickly look at my data set, I have this column, the estimated household income, which is really a range. So I want to split this into two separate columns, a lower bound and an upper bound. So I'm using here this text to column tool that easily splits out those two into a lower and upper bound columns. With that done, I'm doing a bit of data cleansing in here, and with the clean data set, I want to look at my mosaic groups. Now, for predictive analytics, usually it's better to have such a grouping laid out in a white table rather than the way it is done in here, where I have the long table with all the mosaic groups in their own column. So to do that, I'm using this crosstab tool, whereby if I look at the output now, I have my mosaic groups in the column headers, and I have a flag for every user, or every customer, excuse me, whether they are part of this mosaic group or not. So with this preparation, my data has to go through a little bit of cleansing as well. And then in here, I'm splitting these results into current users on the top data stream and new users on the bottom data stream. And I'm doing that because really I want to, again, use my current users to build my predictive model. And here I'm using a random forest tool again for this predictive analysis. As we mentioned, it's as simple as placing the model tool in here, going through the configuration, and running the model. But in reality, as you mentioned, Maimoona, these predictive tools are built around the R predictive language, and they aren't black boxes, so I can easily click on one of these macros and open it. As you see, it's a workflow built around the R tool, and selecting the R tool, I can see here the R code that was generated. But for the vast majority of our users, they don't actually need to worry about all of this complexity, and they don't need to look at this code. Again, simply placing the correct tool or predictive model within the workflow and configuring it and using the result. So in this case, again, we've used the forest model. We've built this predictive model, and we're using this model along with our new customer data with the scoring tool to essentially score the new customers based on the lifetime value that we've calculated for our current users. And with that, we output the result into Tableau. And here, clicking on the link, we can see the Tableau workbook.
Fantastic, thank you. And here we're homing in on the top 5% of customers, and we can see that they actually account for 11% of the revenues. And while we're looking at this, just ponder how you would add that Pareto curve in your favorite spreadsheet, because I think that would be a challenge for most people. My only add to this would be to be able to change that top percentage. So, you know, Pareto 80-20. So I would want to be able to look at bigger percentages so that people could actually drill in and say, where's the 80-20? Does it exist in this instance? And here you have the power to make all those changes, the very simple drag and drop interface. And really the only limit is the imagination you want to apply to it. Back to you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks. So now that we have understood who are our top lifetime value groups and how they respond to various, we need to figure out how they respond to various messages. This is a little bit of the segmentation as well, but then you can start really drilling into, do they care about low-cost messages? Is it about a lifestyle? Is it about being part of a community? Obviously, depending on your industry and your intent. But again, it's about really drilling into how people respond to these offers. And obviously, these messages are taking place in different media. So on the website, from a search engine, from email messages, or even in stores. So you are having different sources of this information. And the problem here is, how do you combine all these sources, and then how do you analyze how the users, various users and consumers are responding to your different offers. So again, this is something we can accomplish within the workflow. I'll pass that back to Fadi.
Thank you, Maimoona. So again, here in offer responsiveness, we've done a lot of analysis. We've done customer acquisition, segmentation, sentiment, and we've calculated lifetime value. But still, we want to assess the offer responsiveness or any changes that we're doing. So in here, we're really using very complex statistical tools like A/B testing, but it's as simple as placing the tool in the workflow. We're using A/B testing to evaluate our changes in messaging platform and message and how they impact different store performances. So to do that, we start by reading in our control data set, and that's the data set that, of the stores that have not seen the change, so they are still on Google AdWords with the old messaging. We're also reading the list of treatment stores, and these are the stores that will receive the change. We also have the test data set, which is effectively the results of both control and treatment stores. We're also reading in our store details so that when we output the result, we actually have the measures, the results, and the store details. But first, we bring in our control data set and feed it into this A/B trend tool, which essentially identifies the baseline trend and seasonality in our control data. Then we take the output and, along with the treatment stores, feed it into this A/B control tool. The A/B control tool identifies which measures out of all the results we should be looking at to assess the store performance. Finally, in the A/B analysis, we feed the result of the A/B control tool along with the treatment and the test results to the A/B analysis tool, which is the tool that's actually calculating the impact of the changes in messaging and platform to the performance between the control and the treatment dataset. Now with that, I output the result into this join tool and bring back my store details. So at the output, I have now my results, my measures of performance, along with the store details, so I can easily identify the stores that I'm looking at. And with that, we output the result into Tableau. And here we go.
Okay, I've unmuted. And now maybe you get a feel for why I work at Tableau. You've got all that paddling like crazy under the water going on in Alteryx, and I just get to cruise along as the swan on top, producing these awesome outputs so that people can very easily see what's going on. So we've done some A/B testing, and we're using blue as the control group here, and brown as the new messaging. And it doesn't need any real explanation. We can see instantly that the new messaging is much better in all but one store. And there's a lone dot over on that box plot on the top right that's crying out to be investigated later. And you can also see below that the filtering that I've been talking about. So now we can click and we can compare regions or individual stores, or just look at one store. The next thing I would want to do is share these dashboards so that colleagues could see and understand the work that I've done, and even ask their own questions of the data. But we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Back to you, Fadi.
Thank you, Bob.
So thanks. I hope everyone has found these 5 key metrics and how you can accomplish them, and really visualize the data within Alteryx and Tableau. So of course, as you've seen, we're very passionate about helping people enhance and improve their self-service data analytics, and this is through that workflow, right? And within that one workflow, you can prepare your data, you can blend it, and you can analyze it. And important here is all your data. So you're bringing together all your data, and the other important point here is that it's repeatable. We want people to not have to redo their work, and you can work smarter, not harder. And then, of course, you can spend more time visualizing your data. Another thing we are passionate about is being able to deploy and share these analytics at scale. And really, this is about you've already gotten all this work done, and then as your organization grows and you're starting to make more data-driven decisions, you can reuse parts of these workflow, and you can really use this work and extend it across an entire organization. And finally, we're about delivering deeper insights in hours, not weeks. And this is what we hear from people who have, they've been working in Excel spreadsheets, and they've been putting together multiple spreadsheets and SQL coding, and then they use Alteryx, and they realize I can do this in hours, not weeks, right? And then they can really start analyzing the data as opposed to spending all their time preparing the data. And each time new data comes in, which is great, but then you have to start over. So really, it's about a time savings. And then married with Tableau, you have this union of time savings, you can analyze the data, and then as well as visual analytics and data discovery and all that work going on below, as Bob mentioned. But really, which is easier than, say, again, coding Excel and coding SQL and putting together multiple Excel spreadsheets. So this is something we're very passionate about. And the next slide, just to really demonstrate a bit further. So we have connections to all these data sources, and so you can bring these all together, or you can bring together, say, 10 Excel spreadsheets. We've heard this from customers, 10 Excel spreadsheets with thousands of rows within each spreadsheet. And then you can layer Twitter data and other social media data, and then you're preparing it and blending it, as well as we saw earlier, enriching it. So the Experian Mosaic data and Dun & Bradstreet data to get that overlay and get just a further picture on your customers. Finally, you can analyze the data. So we saw a lot of these predictive tools being used that you don't need to know R coding and you don't need to hire a data scientist. And really, it's about those business users and people who understand the questions that they need to answer, not having to wait on a data scientist. And finally, it's about sharing and being able to surface that data and surface the data work. So obviously, this great output to Tableau, it can read back to Excel, Teradata, but really about today what we saw was being able to visualize the data and answering those questions by seeing where you need to dig deeper, right? Saying, hey, what is going on here and how do we further analyze this point? And someone can really go in there and quickly see where they need to further analyze the data, then go back into the Alteryx workflow and start pulling in new tools to analyze that data. And so speaking of Tableau, I will turn that back over to Bob.
Thank you. And this is our driving mission. It's been Tableau's mission since our inception in 2003 to help people see and understand their data. And not just data scientists and analysts. Tableau is designed to be used by anyone from any part of your organization. And to have a partner like Alteryx helping streamline and automate complex data flows makes all our lives so much easier. Tableau even has a free version, which you can use with open source data. It's called Tableau Public. Am I allowed to say free on this? Yes, of course I am. Just kidding. So on my next slide, your data journey may start at your desk with Tableau Desktop, where you can connect to one or more data sources or take the output from Alteryx. You can create visualizations like the one you've seen today. You can then publish your work to one of our server platforms and share. And maybe that's where your colleague's data journey begins. Maybe they're viewing what you've shared through their web browser, making comments, and even making changes if you give them permissions to do so. Or it could be your boss sitting in a meeting, connecting to your visualizations through an iPhone or an Android device, even making changes on the fly to answer questions that arise in that meeting. We see data analytics as a journey of exploration and discovery, and I hope today we've helped you get started on your data journey. Thank you. Back to you, Fadi.
Thank you, Bob. So Fiona, I think with that closure on Tableau, I think we're at the last part of our presentation. Anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thank you, Fadi. We're now going to begin answering the questions that we've had submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions panel in your attendee control panel. Fadi, Maimoona and Bob, our first question is, how long does it take to get started with the tools?
So I'll take that. So I think it's relatively easy to get started with Alteryx first. It's downloading really the trial version. So if you browse to our website www.alteryx.com, you can download a free 14-day fully functioning trial version that you can explore. Now, in terms of learning curve, there are a lot of material both on our website and on the community that our users tend to find very easy to get started with. All of the samples, exactly like the samples we've shown today during the presentation are available for free, and the users can use both the data sets and the workflows to start exploring how something is done in Alteryx and how they can apply it to their own internal data set. Maimoona, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you pretty much covered it there. You can get started very quickly. And people often build their first workflow within, 10 to 20 minutes. Obviously, then you can start digging deeper and really building that out. But I think what we see is there's a lot of time savings once you've established that initial workflow, which is great. Bob, anything to add about Tableau tools?
Yeah, Tableau works in a very similar way. You can download a 14-day trial, connect to any data that you've already got. We even provide some sample data within in the desktop, so you can try with that. And literally with a few drags and drops, you start on your data journey. And you can, we often advise, start with some data that you've got that you already present, and reproduce what you've done previously, and then see how much better you can make it in just a few minutes with Tableau.
Great, thank you very much, guys. Someone else is asking, I saw US maps. Are there maps for the rest of the world as well, or is it restricted just to the States?
All right, I guess that one's for me. The maps are global. In many countries, they support down to postcode level as well. We also support Mapbox, so if you want to import satellite maps and things of that type, you can do that as well. So there's a whole range of ways you can add mapping to the charts that you put together.
Perfect, thank you. Jill's just asking.
I was going to add one more.
Sorry, carry on.
Yes. So what's interesting we've seen people do is that they've also in Alteryx can draw their own, sections or regions to output to Tableau. So for example, if you're trying to do a district related to a political group or maybe a school district, you can draw your own map within Alteryx, and that will feed into Tableau as well. That's a very nice function.
Great, thank you. Sorry, what is the minimum size of database recommended for these tools? For example, this looks great for lots of data from multiple sources, but would this suit a smaller firm with a database of 2,000 to 3,000 clients?
Shall I start on that one? For connecting with just Tableau, we've produced some very powerful visualizations with just a few rows of data. There isn't any limit to what you can do. And if you're not sure that you have enough data to make it worthwhile, that's why the trials are there. Download the trial, connect to your data, and just see what insights you can gain from just a few minutes of playing. Fadi.
Yeah, and from an Alteryx perspective also, we're agnostic on both data types and data sizes, because in reality what we focus on as a first step really is that repeatability that we've seen in the survey analysis. Because in there, like, we might have maybe 1,000 responses, 500 responses, but the real value is that I don't have to go into Excel every time I receive a response and process this same step of kind of cleaning the data to output it for our analysis platform. So in that sense, really the size of the data is less important than what the actual process that I want to optimize and use Alteryx for that. Now, having said that, Alteryx obviously works with small data sets and it works with large data sets. We have customers who typically work with tens of thousands of rows, hundreds of thousands of rows on their own desktop machines, so we're not talking databases yet. And for customers who have millions of rows of data, they can easily use our in-database tools to really offload part of this processing to their database systems and then not be limited with the specifications of their own machines.
Perfect, thank you. Different industries or organizations are unique. Is it possible that it can be customized further based on the needs of the market?
I can take that one. This is Maimoona. So of course, yes, I mean, this is just one example here we saw around, marketing and customer segmentation, but obviously we have a lot of customers who are utilizing Alteryx and Tableau for manufacturing and analyzation, as well as more geospatial capabilities, trying to find retail locations, everything, again, from manufacturing to human. We actually had a really interesting use case with human resources where they're analyzing flight risk and compensation methods. So the really applications are endless. And it's interesting because often one group within an organization will start using it and then they'll share this experience with other groups. So it's moved from HR to engineering to manufacturing. So yes, we use with various organizations.
Perfect. We've got a bit of a data protection question here. So I think, Bob, if someone is to share their data, who is it that gets to see it?
Yeah, that's a standard question that we get an awful lot. You can control who sees the data if you've got, say, Active Directory or something similar in your organization. You can group people so that based on their login, you decide what they see. There's a project that was rolled out by NHS Scotland, and they have multiple layers. So at the basic level, someone can log in with very limited access, and they can just generally see stuff that's happening within the region. The next layer down, they can see a lot more, maybe they need to order supplies for the various hospitals so they can get to that level. And then at the very bottom level, you've got nurses and doctors seeing actual patient data. And you can even then subdivide that by region. So if the person looking after the Northwest logs in, the information for their region. If someone from London or Brussels logs in, they just see what you allow them to see. So you have total control. And you've also got auditing, so you can see who's logged in, what they've looked at. So there's no end to the level of control you have. There's no danger to publishing your data.
Yeah, I just like to add, apologies. As Bob mentioned, there's ways we often see organizations use pieces of the workflow for different uses. So, if a customer needs to come in and visualize their data, they're only getting a certain subset of the data. So this manufacturing company was using Alteryx workflow and outputting it to Tableau, and a customer who's utilizing the manufacturing services can log in and see where their product is in the cycle if there's any issues. But obviously internally, the production group can see more levels of detail, and then upper management has a whole other subset that they can just see sort of a high-level detail. So as, again, as Bob mentioned, there's various ways of putting parameters around that, and as well as you can use that Alteryx workflow for different sections to feed out to that.
Yeah, and essentially from, I think, both tools respect the security that's set up on the data sources. So whatever configuration is done for every user, that user can only see the data set that they are allowed to see from these data sources, even if they are connecting to the same database, the same table. If they have different accesses, they would see different results.
Great, thank you. One final question. Do you find that this is only for marketing use, or can you use these tools for other use cases?
Maybe I'll take a shot at that. Within Tableau itself, we use our product throughout the organization. So obviously marketing uses it. We connect to Google Analytics to show us how our campaigns are running and where our traffic is coming from on the website. Most of our salespeople, they log in the morning, they see a what's hot dashboard, and that tells them individually where to spend their time making their calls that morning. Finance uses it to track everything. Production uses it. Developers use it to track bugs. There's no limit within an organization to where Tableau can be used, and obviously Alteryx providing that information.
I couldn't have said it better myself. We also segmentation for sales data and to analyze campaigns. I mentioned that manufacturing and the HR use case earlier. So again, yes, as Bob said, there's no limit really.
So indeed, with Alteryx, we're really industry agnostic, and Tableau similarly. If I'm talking specifically about Alteryx, because these are the users that I interact to, we have users in financial services, in operations, in marketing, obviously, but even in retail and in space allocation. And when I'm mentioning these industries, the use of Alteryx spans all different departments in these industries. So there are even users in financial industry who are actually using Alteryx to make financial decisions based on their internal data.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I'm afraid we've run out of time now. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Alteryx and Tableau and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.